So I do want to introduce, and I have the privilege to introduce our Jolt's COO, founder, and one of the managers I love listening to the most. So Nitzan. What she's going to talk to us about today is about really how to network. We do realize that, one of the struggles we all have in getting into high tech is really having people respond back to our CVs. And one of the best ways we know to increase the chances of getting people to kind of contact us and getting our first interview is really by getting to know the right people and having someone help pull us in to our next role. So Nitzan is going to give us some input from her experience and kind of, her ideas on how to network and different tips and tricks on how to do it the right way. Again, it's important for me to ask that whoever can turn on your cameras, please turn on your cameras. We do want this to be an open dialogue between you and Nitzan, and the conversation and your questions are really important to us. But we do want this to stay, clear. So anyone who unmutes their microphone, just make sure you raise your hand using the chat beforehand so Nitzan knows to kind of call you out. That way we don't have the interruptions and the noises. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Nitzan, and here we go.
Hi, guys. Good evening, and thank you guys for joining. I actually love that this is the perfect size of a group because it means that we can get really close and interactive. I don't want anything formal. I want to make this yours, and I want to try to spend this time together by giving you the most value that I can. Anything that I planned ahead that isn't going to help you guys is meaningless. And that is why I do ask you to stop me at any time and feel free to jump in. You can raise your hand physically, you can raise your hand digitally, whatever you need to get my attention, and question, doubt, give a specific example, and we can all work on it together. If you have a specific dilemma that comes up, I would love to address those specifically. I'm going to chat to you about networking. I think, I've heard hundreds of times throughout my journey, people saying I suck at networking. It's not a thing that I'm good at doing. I don't know how to start a conversation. And the great way when we don't know how to do something is to avoid it, which is fine. However, I want us to also think about this as a business tool. That's the way I look at networking. It's something that I do like to do, but more than anything, I think of it as one of the tools that I have in my toolkit as a business person. And I don't think that it is that big of a challenge to get at least pretty good at it. And I do think it goes a long way. I will start a presentation, but I will probably also stop it every now and then because then I can see your faces much, much, much better. And I'm not a big fan of presentations anyway. So jumping in, once again, it's better for me if you want to tell me something to unmute and tell me. Don't write it down because that I can miss, and your voice I won't be able to miss. So just really briefly about myself, I am the co-founder of Jolt, but before Jolt, I guess this is kind of a slide that represents the main logos of places that I was a part of throughout my career. And more than anything, I think the interesting part that is connected to this topic is that, thanks, Yogev, is that I've never handed in a CV in my life. I do have one. I think it's updated to like 2006 or something. But none of the leaps that I took in my career, none of the kind of different chapters were never going in the right funnels. I never applied for a job on a website and kind of did the whole classic kind of funnel, which I know is very Israeli of me. And I also encourage you guys to never go through the classic funnel. Because it's our upside as Israelis. So What did take me throughout my career was knowing the right people and using those relationships or working with those relationships at the right time. So networking is about creating a strong network of people, but the actual challenge of networking is also maintaining that network and knowing when to utilize or when to kind of bring relationships and connections closer when you need them or when the other side needs those connections. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Just really briefly, what we're going to go through, we're going to run through what is networking, just so we're on the same page. Why is it important? Where can it get us? Where is it done? And then we'll focus on how, obviously, because that's the most interesting part of anything. And that's going to be kind of the main chunk of the session. I'm not focusing it on finding a job solely. However, I will give reference to that at all parts of it. And again, networking is, it's interaction between human beings. So as you're looking for a job, it's definitely something that can really strengthen the process. So I will touch on job search as well as we chat. Does that sound good to you guys?
Sounds amazing.
Perfect. So, I mean, I've heard since, I think I started teaching networking on Jolt about 5.5 years ago. I did maybe 100 sessions of networking. The presentations obviously changed throughout the time. But throughout the last 5 years, the word networking has become pretty annoying and people use it too much and for too many reasons. So just so we're all on the same page, I want to kind of make sure we're talking about the same thing. Networking to me, more than, is a collection of a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, it's a relationship between 2 people, 3 people, but me and someone else. Basically, we're talking about interpersonal interaction. It can be online, it could be offline, it could be between me and an HR professional or a recruiter or a potential manager, but it could be between me and someone that I don't even know what their job is. And it doesn't really matter in that situation. Many times, networking is mixing business with pleasure, right? You guys can see that I'm already with my pleasure because it is 6 p.m. and this is like the fun thing of my night, spending time with you guys. And a lot of times networking is mixing business and pleasure, which is why a lot of times people don't really think of it as business, because it's in a cocktail party or an event or in a conference, which is kind of like, wait, am I really working? Am I not really working? Why are we doing all this? This doesn't seem like my classic job or what I think a job may look like. And then, because it's not science, right? And it's also very hard to measure, then a lot of people tend to just avoid it. It's important for me to make sure we all understand that networking is not selling. Okay, so meeting Oren and saying like, "Hey, Oren, I'm Nitzan. I'm from Jolt. Have you heard of Jolt? Jolt is a school." Okay, that's not networking. It's a sales pitch. And I actually want us to think of networking as something that is completely different than selling. Where did my mouse go? Hold on. Rega. Okay, there it is. Sorry, guys. Another thing is that wait, do you guys do any of the words here that come up not make sense to you, or do you have any words that are missing that kind of resonate with the word networking for you? Okay, cool. So more than anything, to me, networking is value creation. It's not about a transaction. Okay, when I meet a new person in a conference or in a Jolt event or on the street, I'm not thinking about this person and seeing like, how can he or she help me, or where can they get me, or what can they give me. What I think about when I meet a new human being, and this has nothing to do with business, is how can I create value? And it has to do a lot with kind of how I know myself and what value can I give to the world. And it's not for a specific cause, right? So I'm giving value, and it will maybe, but maybe not, come back to me eventually as you know, value in return. So it's definitely, it has to be for a cause unknown, right? Otherwise it becomes selling again. What types of value can you guys, or can we create in interactions with a person that we've never met before? What can that value look like? Not Ariela.
For me, when I meet a new person, I feel that the value I can give him or her is just being there. I mean, sometimes people want to express themselves and share things that they are feeling. So for me, this is like my natural position. I know it's not like ideal for networking, because you have to know more people and not spend the whole evening with just one person. But for me, having like a long talk with one person to get to know each other is like, for me, it's the best thing.
Okay. Okay. What else? What are kind of value bits that I can give someone when I first meet them?
Possible introductions to other people that might be relevant in either term he may need, business, social, whatever.
For sure. That's a great point. Thank you for that. If I meet someone that does cybersecurity, for example, or is looking for a job in security, and I'm not necessarily the right person, then a great value that I can give that person is connecting them to someone that I know that can be helpful at that moment, whether in that specific event or after that on email, for example. Any other ideas? So pieces of value that, Dorit?
Yeah, so I thought maybe about information. Let's say someone is working in a specific field and I have no information about it, and I'm asking all kinds of questions, or maybe he can mentor me and like learning more about the industry. So I think that's a strong.
That. That's a great point, because it goes both ways. So giving value can be teaching, right? So if I go to an event and I am and again, this could be like coming to Joel to do like a session before the course starts or whatever. Any interaction between two or more people is networking, right? So it could be something that I teach, but it could also be listening to someone, right? So both of those are value. I'm a great listener, which Amir maybe connects with what you said. People love to be listened to. And just listening or saying, you know, if I want to learn more about NFTs and I want to buy a digital bull or whatever, then I go to an NFT event and I don't really know much about it, but I start speaking to someone that seems like they know a bit more, and I then ask, like Dorit says, you know, what's big, like what should I be reading, who should I be listening to, like what should I know about this new thing called NFT, or teach something, right? Teach something also doesn't have to be professional. I can give like funny anecdotes, right? Like you guys know that Macaulay Culkin just had his first baby, right? This happened today. This is huge news, and it's a great piece of value that I want to share with all of you. No, I'm kidding. I just saw it on e-news as I was waiting for the session to start. But I actually think that like little funny anecdotes that, you know, are kind of bits of information are also great pieces of value. Anyhow, the point is that when I get to know new people, that's kind of what I want you guys to have in mind, and we'll talk about it more in a second. So first of all, obviously networking is a very strong business tool to find a job. And I want, you know, and I am kind of the living proof to that, as, you know, being someone that has always used networking to find her next thing, because I started my role as manager of the accelerator at the Junction through someone I knew, you know, through my professor in university. And then I met my next boss, who was from Deutsche Telekom or T-Mobile, who hired me to become an investment manager. He's, you know, even from Berlin, so he happened to be in Tel Aviv that day, and we had coffee. next thing is that I'm working in this German company, and I met Roy, my co-founder, you know, the CEO of Jolt, on this kind of delegation, that young leader delegation, or a kind of program that we did together that had nothing to do with business. And that's how I became an entrepreneur. So networking is a very strong tool. It could be knowing a person that works in a company you want to work for. It could be knowing the HR. It could be also just knowing someone that knows the industry well enough to kind of help point you at the right places. More than that, though, right? It's not just about finding a job, because you all will find jobs, and then networking still will matter, because it can bring a lot of additional things, right? So it has to do, you know, if you did the SDR course, then networking can be a very, very strong source of leads, you know, bringing on customers. It could bring on investors if you ever start your own company and want to raise money. Through networking, you can also hire, right? You know, a very kind of known strategy of recruiters is to walk around different events and conferences. Obviously, this changed in, you know, COVID times, but still happens in different digital and offline events, that recruiters kind of walk around and find people to hire through events, partnerships, PR, and as Dorit said again, advice and mentors. You know, PR reminds me of the story when I went to the, I got invited to the Japanese emperor's, it was the Japanese embassy in Herzliya, but it was the emperor's birthday. He obviously never showed up. He stayed in Japan. But there was this big kind of Japanese celebration, and I had nothing to do with any of the people there, because it was, you know, all politicians and like very formal people, Knesset, da 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 da. I have nothing to do with that industry, but I had a friend that worked in the Prime Minister's office, and I was his +1. I was like, fine, there's going to be great sushi. I'm going to come. And I was not excited about meeting anyone there. And I was like, okay, you know, my networking skills, you know, are coming with me because they're everywhere, but I don't expect much from this event. And I stood there pretty alone, which I'm not used to, having like my sake and da da da. And then I spot this red coat. And you can imagine in a formal kind of event in an ambassador's house, what do you think was the color that most people wore?
Black.
Gray.
Normal.
Great.
Yes. Okay. So this red jacket stood out, obviously. And then she turns around, and I realized her name is Noa Razin. I don't know if you guys know her. She went to school with me, but now she's this kind of food blogger, and she is on she has the morning show on 13, whatever it's called. And then we chat. So we weren't friends in school, but we were both there alone. She was invited to kind of report on the sushi and the event, or the food, because she's in like a foodie. And we ended up chatting, and one thing led to another. She ended up also introducing me to her husband that came with her to the event. And two things came out of that event, which I did not expect. A, she invited me to be on the morning show and kind of talk about Jolt. And B, she introduced me to her husband, who turns out is kind of a teacher for teachers. So they do like a training for speakers, like TED speakers, but also managers and stuff like that. And they ended up working with us for a long time, teaching our Jolters how to teach. So both of these things came out of this event that I really had no expectations from. And I honestly think that's where a lot of value comes from, when it's not about selling. Like, I didn't go to find people to work with, right? But it did come up from kind of a natural conversation. So you never know. And that's the exact kind of reason why, to me, networking is really done everywhere. When I meet someone new, I put out my best foot forward, because who knows, right? If I meet, you know, Nimrod on Rothschild, and I know Nimrod because he just graduated one of our courses, and he's walking with his friend, and I say hello to Nimrod, then I will always make sure I also introduce myself to the third person, which is something that is very uncommon to do in Israel. But in the US, for example, you'd never be, you know, speaking with someone and then a third person stands there and the two people wouldn't introduce. It's very unpolite to do that. And it's also very unpolite in Israel, but it's not the only unpolite thing we do. So I want to also recommend to you guys that when you walk with a friend and you meet a third person that you know or the friend knows, make sure you also make that third connection to close the triangle, because it also kind of eliminates the awkwardness of like the third person standing and really not knowing who we're speaking with. Anyhow, that's an anecdote, but you know, my networking kind of jacket is always on, because it could be, you know, you said you guys are doing the fancy family dinners on New Year's Eve, right? It could be an aunt that works in a specific company that, or her son maybe works in a place that can be relevant for one of you guys. It could be, you know, this random person you meet at a party or in a coffee place. And it could also be kind of friends from school, right? Noah Rosine, I wasn't her friend at IDC when we went to school, but I was also very open to speak with her, you know, after 2 years since we graduated, and kind of chat. And it wasn't something that was embarrassing for me to do, because we never burnt any bridges, so why not chat? So that's kind of the overview of, you know, how I think of this business tool and kind of what can come of it. Do you guys have any questions so far before we jump into the how? Awesome. I mean, that means I'm doing really well. So we'll continue. Okay, so I'm dividing this how situation into 3 parts: before an event, during an event, and after an event. And before I do that, I ask you guys to think of an event, okay? An event could be you are going to an interview. Yes, that's a networking event to me. It could be a dinner party with some friends that you know, but also some friends that you may not know. It could be coming to a Jolt event. It could be a conference of some sort. It could be anything. Who wants to share? And I want you to have that event in mind, right? Because when I'm speaking through this, I want you guys to kind of have the reference in your brain so that it doesn't get lost. Who wants? 2 people want to share what the next networking event for them is coming up?
The Jolt job gathering is my next.
A Jolt what?
Job gathering, the job.
Oh,
hunt.
cool.
Our job search gathering.
Awesome. That's definitely a networking event. Okay. Anyone else other than Tomel?
Don't be shy.
You need to have it in mind if you want to.
I have one, but I'm not sure I'm gonna go. But this is like events that happens frequently, and I'm all the time like not sure I should go. It's an event of smart mobility, and I think it's called the EcoMotion.
Yeah.
And for me, this is a very interesting industry, which I have no connection to besides my passion. So every time there is a new event, I'm considering whether I should go or not, and eventually I don't. So maybe I would go to the next one. Not sure.
I've been to many EcoMotion events. I think they're really great. It's been a while, but they're good, and there's some interesting people there. If you think it's an interesting industry, then definitely go with your mask. Anyone else? Anything? Okay. Even if you didn't share, then just remember I want you to have something in mind. So, you know, let's talk about this EcoMotion event, for example. As we are thinking of the next event that we're going to attend, and it doesn't matter if it's 200 people or 20 people, I want you guys to do your homework in advance. And what does that mean? I want to really make sure we find the right event to attend. There are a lot, right? Amir, the reason that you haven't been going is because there is a lot of options, and there's a lot of meetups, and there are a lot of networking events, and there are a lot of kind of social interactions. And we think twice today before we go to a social event, right? Especially because of the pandemic and all and the winter and all kinds of hazards. So the right event means an event that has people that may be interesting to me, topics that may be interesting to me, and that I know why I'm going. And that connects to the 5th bullet, which is setting a goal, and we'll get to it in a second. Finding the right event also knows knowing where to look, right? And that could be in the Jolt, you know, kind of through the Jolt Career Center. It could be through the meetup groups. It could be through Facebook groups. So as long as you have the different kind of options of events, I don't want us to be wasting time on events that really mean nothing, because that can really get us burnt out and hate networking. Because when we just go to random events that we don't really know why we're going to, that's kind of where it gets not helpful. By the way, have you guys seen me on the morning show with Noel Wazina how do you say it? Interviewing me? No, right? Because none of you watch the morning show, and that's why I did not go, right? It doesn't make sense for me to go to the morning show when none of my potential clients or people that I work with watch this show. So it's a complete waste of my time. So I said, thank you, but I'm not coming, because that's where not where my audience is, right? So that's finding the right event. And that goes with knowing your audience, right? So if I'm going to the event, I want to make sure I know who's actually going to be there. Hi, Yoram. How are you? Thanks for muting. If you guys just joined, by the way, feel free to chat, to write in the chat box, introduce yourself and share what course you're in or graduated. So knowing the audience means I know who I may meet there. And that's, you know, if I'm going to an event about kind of HR tech, right? And I know the reason I may go there is because I know the only people that you know are going to be in an event is the speakers of the event, because those are always on the poster, right? And if I go to an HR tech event that I could assume, and I can also see on the publications that there's going to be 4 panelists and they're all HR specialists in cool companies. If I'm looking for a job, even though HR means nothing to me, that's, you know, a great event to probably join. And not just that, I want to find out specifically about those 4 companies that are being represented by these HR specialists. And I'm just making up an event in my head, but those exist. And think of, you know, are there roles in these companies that are interesting to me? And who are these people speaking on the panel? Because people who are speaking on panels, and speakers in general in conferences, are very used to people reaching out to them or, you know, coming to speak to them after they speak, but they're not used to people speaking to them before they speak. Have you been to, let me kind of rewind. Have you been to a conference where, you know, there's, you know, 5 panelists on the stage, and then the session ends and there's like lines to speak with all of them? You know what I'm talking about? Cool. So my recommendation is to speak to those people before the panel. They're the same people. The thing is, people don't bother doing their homework, and then they just listen to the panel, and then they stand in line to speak to those people. But what generally happens is that these, you know, I showed up to this webinar half an hour early, right? And I would do the same if this was a live event, which I do a lot. No one ever speaks to me before I get on stage. But when I get off stage, it's like a gazillion people all of a sudden have questions for me. But I was the same person an hour ago and no one reached out, right? And my face was on the poster. So think about, you know, how you can get that competitive advantage and reach out to the speakers in advance. By the way, if this is a big conference like EcoMotion, Amir, you can actually reach out to the people in advance on LinkedIn and saying like, hey, I saw you were going to be at EcoMotion. Maybe we can grab coffee, or, you know, I'd love to get a quick question with you if there's someone specific you'd want to meet. As I prepare for the event and kind of know who's going to be there, I think about what's that added value that I'm going to bring into the situation. Am I going to have like random funny anecdotes to share? Will I be looking for you know, specific people from specific companies, and what can I bring into conversations, right? Do I want to teach something? Do I want to learn something? Or do I just want to, you know, kind of get to know new people? In order to really be able to get conversations started, which is probably the toughest thing to do with networking. How do I start speaking to a person that I've never spoken with? That's kind of the things people dread. So a great way to do that is knowing what's happening in that scene, right? If you're going to an EcoMotion event, then you'd want to read about mobility, right? And transportation and all that's going on in the scooter world. If you're going to a cryptocurrency event, then you would want to read the news about that. But generally, if you're going to any event or interview, read the news that are relevant, right? We have on the table at Jolt globes waiting every morning, because if we're a company working in the tech industry, then we need to know what's going on. And I want my people to be reading these newspapers. If you're going to any interview, as you're in the cab or just before you go in or that morning, scroll through the business magazines. Calcalist, Globes, The Marker, they really matter, and they're great conversation starters, and they're great references. And if someone in an interview, throws out something into the air about an exit that was done or something that a company just announced, and you don't know what they're speaking about, then you're not going to feel great about it. And also it's going to kind of take away points for the person speaking with you, right? So kind of bring context, think, prepare in advance, know the people you're going to meet. If it's an interview, then, double, then kind of times 1,000, right? Know the people you're going to meet. I know you spoke about that a lot in the course as well. But also know more than that, know kind of the surrounding circles of the company and read the news. Those are great conversation starters. If you are going to an event, and this can be, Tomer, like you mentioned, job search event at Jolt, you want to set goals. Otherwise, we could be wasting time and not going to these events anymore because we feel like we're wasting time. What types of goals can we set for networking events?
Maybe something that we can actually measure, like OKRs. So for example, like speak to 5 people, or that could help you, I guess, also like step outside of your comfort zone. So if you're having a hard time like approaching people, so if you say, you know what, I have to approach 3 different people, so then you have to do it. So for people that are like goal oriented, I think it can really help.
100%. Yeah, goals don't really matter if they're not measurable. So Lior, that's a great point. So meeting 5 people, getting 5 business cards, learning 3 new things about NFT or whatever, getting the next meeting, right? I want to meet one person that I have a meeting in the schedule with for, I don't know, a few days later. Speaking to 5 or 3 HR professionals. And by the way, Amir, you mentioned you're like the person that likes longer conversations. That's fine. I know this because, some people would go to a networking event and speak for 5 minutes to 10 people, and some would speak to one person for 15 minutes. I have to say that that's more in the friendship zone than networking. Networking is more like, the bees kind of coming into the flowers and spending a little time there and going to the next flower. That's how you would make your net wider. But it can also be 2-3 meaningful conversations rather than 10 kind of shorter and more shallow ones. And the last thing is we want to know, and this is extremely important, obviously, for interviews, we want to be ready with our pitch, but we don't necessarily want to pitch. And we'll get to that when we speak about conversations. But when I speak about the pitch, I'm talking about how do I present myself. When I am asked to introduce Nitzan, it's never random. It will always, though, sound random. And it will always be a little different. But there are things that I will always say. And I have this kind of list of lines in my head that I know when, how to kind of pitch depending on the situation that I'm in. And the reason I say be ready with your pitch, okay, so know how you're going to present yourself, but don't present yourself. The reason I'm saying don't pitch is because I always want to be the person asking the questions in a conversation, getting tons of information from the other side, and only then presenting myself. Because then when I present myself, the presentation is going to be so much more on point and relevant to the persons that I'm speaking with. Okay, and we'll get to that in a second. But as I'm preparing for an event, and again, if it's an interview, by far more important, how do I present myself? Because that's always going to come up in an interview, right? And I want to add specifically for interviews, it's not just about presenting myself. If I'm interviewed, I'm coming to an interview prepared with 2 or 3 stories that are going to seem like I just came up with them in my head, but I actually had them way before. Do you guys have those in mind? Do you speak about that throughout your courses, kind of the stories you're going to bring up in interviews? Kind of, maybe.
Anybody heard during the course about their elevator pitch?
I think that it depends on the interview and the person interviewing you. But I usually tend to really, like you said, go over their LinkedIn profile and see if there's something that I can tell that can really cater to what they're looking for or their personality. So for example, someone interviewed me and he's also an artist, okay? And my father paints. So I wanted to bring it up during the conversation. So things we have in common, or maybe a story about something I did that this person can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. So that's great. As you prepare for an interview, I am speaking about stories that are not presenting me like I'm Nitzan, I did this, I did that, but stories that represent questions that are going to come up in an interview. Maybe this is a whole other webinar that I could do, but really kind of on the tip of the iceberg. The questions in interviews are very similar, and they could be asked in a lot of different ways, but they're always, there's 99% of the time there's going to be a question about a challenge you came across in a previous job and how you overcame it. There's going to be a question about a strength of yours and about a weakness of yours, right? We can answer those in a very kind of dry, uninteresting way, like I'm a perfectionist, right? Or I'm very, I take things very personally, or really kind of boring, dry answers. Or we can answer with stories. If I'm asked about my strength and I say, wow, that actually reminds me of something that happened to me when I worked at Deutsche Telekom. I did this and this and this. And then my boss, all of a sudden on a Friday night, emailed me this email that really got me and I became the hero. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But as we're preparing for interviews, you always can use the same stories, by the way, and they have nothing to do with the person that's going to interview you. It's about you and it's your stories. And, they really, really help make you a way more interesting candidate than the people who just answered with very kind of simple words. Happy to talk more about that if we had time. So we did our homework. We're ready for the event. By the way, doing our homework also gives us more confidence in going to an event that may be sometimes awkward or embarrassing. So it always helps to be prepared. And now we have reached the event. So let's all have in mind for a second an event in the Jolt offices where we come to meet other graduates and kind of look at the together. Where we did the preparation, and now we're at the event, during the event. So this is about kind of the strategy of who am I in this event. So first things first, you come to an event, where do I want to stand in a space, in a location that the event is at, in order to kind of make my networking easier and more smooth?
At the center.
Okay. Others?
Near the coffee.
Near the coffee, for sure.
Answers are being written on chat. Someone wrote the center, at the bar.
At the bar.
Yeah, cool. So the right, the right place to be is where people stand. If you're in the center, that people are probably going to walk through, right, the center or the entrance. So you want to be where most of the people kind of end up being, or at least come to and stand for a bit. And that's two places. It's either, the food and drinks or the toilet. So you choose your place. I'd rather not stand by the toilet, but you do you. No, I'm kidding. But food and drinks is a really, really strategic and comfortable place to stand in a networking event. This may seem silly to you guys, but it really kind of eases the awkwardness of the situation of starting conversations. The reason for that is because when you're standing, A, people come there, right? And they stand for a couple of minutes. B, it's a great conversation starter. If you have nothing to talk about the quiche, right? Talk about the wine, talk about the beer. I went to a meeting at Autodesk in San Francisco, and we lived there, and it was St. Patrick's Day, the Irish holiday. And I had this meeting, and I came a bit early, obviously, and they had this happy hour, and they put out a lot of different beers from different breweries, like in the Bay Area. And I was very new to San Francisco. I didn't know any of the beers. So I came up to the table. I didn't know anyone. I was just waiting for the meeting. And I just asked the first person to my right, what do you recommend? And he said in a very Israeli accent, one of the beers. I was like, hey, Israeli, da 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 da. Ends up like, super surprising. He was an Israeli working for Autodesk. There's only 2 in San Francisco, Israelis working for Autodesk, but he happens to be the person I meet. One thing leads to another. Autodesk became a customer of Jolt. This is in a different model. And we became really good friends, which is also a great kind of outcome of networking when you're in a new city and you don't know anyone. So standing by the food and drinks is a really kind of, kind of eases your way into conversations. And again, may seem little, but when I'm holding something in my hand, then I don't, I feel less awkward with my hands, because what happens when I feel that I don't know what to do with my hands is I hold this. Okay. And holding an iPhone is really being unapproachable. Right? When I'm doing something on my phone, it means anything that's happening out of this event is more interesting for me, and no one's going to come up to me when I'm on my phone. It's like closing the door to my office. So when I have something in my hand, it kind of helps me kind of become a little less fidgety. Wingman is just kind of my little trick to not feel, to not come on my own. It's much easier to come to events with people that not only but you don't have to know them well. You also share with them, what are your goals for this event? Why are you actually going? They can save you from really awkward conversations. You can have this little signal that you kind of wave to them, and then they come grab you for something because you're in a conversation that you see is not going anywhere, but you don't necessarily know how to end it. And I know you've all been there. By the way, my kind of way to avoid those, if I'm speaking to Ariela and I don't think she's interesting and I want to leave the conversation, not a true story, then I kind of look above the right shoulder and wave. And this has to be an event with other people, obviously. And then by the time Ariela looks back, then the person who waved isn't waving anymore. And they say, oh, I just met a friend. I'm going to go say hi. There doesn't have to be anyone there. Someone taught me this once. It made me laugh a lot, and I've tried it many times since, and it works. Another really, really important tip, in my opinion, is to become memorable. And I really want to stop on this and say it again. I want all of you to think, how are you memorable? The reason I'm putting an emphasis on this is because it really matters in interview processes. How are you different than any of the other candidates that this recruiter has spoken to today or this week? Why are you funny? Are you wearing something that stands out? Are you wearing a yellow shirt? Are you telling them really interesting stories? Are you asking them questions that are really relevant to them and the company that they're in, which means you did your homework? Do you have anything related to them? Like Lior said, I read about the person in advance, and then I see that they wrote a book and I wrote a book. Then I talk to them about the book that I wrote, for example. This really, really, really matters in networking. Because remember, do you remember the color of the coat that Noah was wearing in the ambassador's house that I told you about? Right? It was red.
Red.
It stood out, and it was really memorable. I remember it to today, and it's been a while since this happened. And I really have this in mind before I go to events in which I'm really not, and there are a lot of other, if I'm going to an event as an entrepreneur, I'm probably going to be in an event with a lot of other entrepreneurs. And if I want to be the one standing out, then I want to think in advance, how will I stand out? And I have, what I used to do was really kind of, I did wear yellow, and it became a joke. My co-founders used to laugh at me whenever I wore yellow. They knew there was, something that afternoon. You know how you get name tags in every event you go to that are all printed and they look the same? I printed out my own name tag and I used it over and over and over again, and it was the coolest one. Why do I have to use the name tag that this event printed out for me? It always says the same thing. It says Nitzan Cohen Arazi Jolt, or whatever the title. But why not have my own? And then, just that is a conversation starter, because I have my own name tag, and now I'm talking about it to people. And then we talk about sustainability, and that I don't want to waste name tags, and that I want to, do my own thing, and right? And then whatever happens with the conversation, it's just kind of a better start, right? It's a great way to start a conversation. Another thing, someone that was wearing a pin that is of their favorite basketball team or whatever is also a great conversation starter. Or if you're wearing a pink bow tie or whatever. So I really want you guys to think about, what are those things that make you memorable, or that can make you memorable. They can be, kind of your out-facing things, like, as I said, clothes or whatever, or name tags, but they can also be, you being really funny, for example, or having a really special voice or whatever, or being really smart, or having really great kind of general knowledge. Do you have any other ideas? Cool. That means you guys are really memorable. No, I'm just kidding. The be selective has to do with wasting time again, with staying in conversations that we think are valuable, and kind of not wasting time on kind of speaking to people we don't want to speak to, because that happens too. I'm jumping in, and this is I'm going to skip this, and we're coming close to the end. 2-3 more minutes, and then we'll leave a bit of time for questions. So kind of in a way wrapping up, because this has to do a lot with everything that we've talked about, is more about, if we talked about during the event kind of where to stand and the strategy behind it, then now it's actually the conversation. And we talked about, how do I really start conversations? What are some ideas that came up throughout this talk that are great conversation starters? I'm not giving up on this one. You guys are going to answer it.
No. What are you doing for New Year? Yes. What are you doing tonight?
Yes. What are you doing for New Year's? That's a great question. Context. Great questions are ones that have to do with whatever is going on right now, right? It could be about, how did you arrive, right? If the event is happening in a faraway place, like in the north and the south, whatever, how did you come? How are you finding it so far? Have you heard any speaker that's interesting? Who is interesting? Worst thing you speak about is the weather, but yes, if you come to that, then you can also speak about the weather. So yes, Dorit, that's a great point. Tomer, want to say something? Anyone else? Conversation starters that we discussed today, or others?
I don't know. It depends on the situation. I don't come with you're very strategic. I must say you're very, very strategic. It's okay. It's fine. But I don't come. It depends on the situation. I think I don't come very much with the game plan. I do have my goals and my sets, but I don't come with a very pinpointed
Text.
way of how to interact and meet new people.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, this is a great point because I'm making something that is it's, you know, networking is a very soft skill. It cannot seem rehearsed. That's really weird when you speak to someone that seems like they've prepared the questions in advance. You'll never know that about me. And by the way, I don't think of my questions in advance, but as I'm trying to kind of make this into a skill that is strategic, then I do want us to have this in mind in advance, and it becomes very natural. So if it comes out natural to you, depending on the context, that's perfect. Other things.
So no, I'm not sure. I think it's a virtue that you can teach it, obviously, but it is a virtue that it seems like that you were born with it or you're lacking it, and you need to acquire it and to
Strengthen it. That's true. That's true. So what I started talking about before is about this pitch situation. So it's important to say that it's not about you, right? It's not about us. When I speak to someone new, I really, really try to be the one asking the questions. And I'm not talking about personal questions that make the other person uncomfortable, but I'm talking about creating interactions or creating conversations that are not making it about me. And this is, again, a very Israeli thing to do. When someone is telling me something, the instinct of a lot of people I know, I'm not going to generalize Israelis, is to say, oh yeah, this happened to me, da, 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 da. Okay, reflecting where that thing finds me at that point. That's fine, but it's a conversation killer. So try to be the one getting to know the other person, because if you're speaking right now, then obviously you're both doing this thing called networking. Try to be the one asking the questions, at least for the beginning, so that you get more context about the person and you learn a bit more about who the other person is. And by the way, asking what do you do isn't necessarily the first question that needs asking, especially because a lot of times people get a bit uncomfortable with this question because maybe they don't really like what they do or whatever. It could be a question, but it doesn't have to be the first one. The first questions don't have to be professional. And then when the conversations does become about you, when you stop listening and start talking, then again, we want to think about making it interesting. You know, when I talked about presenting myself and knowing my pitch, I'm not going to say, hey, I'm Tzanka Narazi, I'm 34, I'm a mom of 2, and I co-founded Jolt, okay, which is all true, but that's not how I'm going to say it. I'm going to say, my name is Nitzan and I'm allergic to kiwi and da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, that's more how it's going to sound, because those are kind of hooks that are going to make the conversation more interesting, and then people can kind of go back to the kiwi and share their allergies. So again, this is if we want to make a conversation interesting. Remembering our added value in these kind of situations when we're already starting to talk to someone, and remember names, which again may seem silly, but we're so used to people saying, oh, I'm terrible with names, don't get offended if I forget your name. It's offending when people forget our names. There is one thing that represents us more than anything, and that is our name. And if I start speaking to Jonathan and then 3 minutes into the conversation, I don't remember his name anymore because I never gave it any tzumet lev, then, you know, it's fine because he's used to it, because a lot of people don't remember his name after 3 minutes. But if I will remember the name, it will give me extra points. There are a lot of different tactics of how to remember people's names. Feel free to Google them because we don't have time. And the last thing I'm going to say, and this is kind of a general summary again, is if we talked about kind of preparing for the event and then what happens during the event, all of that doesn't really matter if we don't follow up. Following up is actually that part of, after bringing someone into our network, this kind of pins them into our network. And it does not have to be, and when I say follow up, I'm giving here examples of emails, and you can see on the screen emails that I sent people after kind of the first time I met them, or even if I never met them. Normally I follow up on email. I know some people in Israel follow up on WhatsApp. I know some people follow up on LinkedIn. It's all okay as long as the other person is on that same platform and feels comfortable with it. I like emails because normally what happens after an event is that I don't have a call for action. I don't need anything at this point, but I do want that person to remember me when I may need something. And this can happen in 2 months or in 2 years, right? But when I email someone the next day and we have like a quick conversation, just, hi, it was great meeting you. Here's that video we talked about, for example. Then when I email them 3 months later, then it's already going to be in very positive context. And it's not going to be like, hey, remember 3 months ago we met in this bar. My name is Nitzan, da, 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 da. I don't know if they're going to respond to that. So about following up on email specifically, it has to be really fast after the event. Don't follow up, 5 days later if you want that person in your network, or if you need something from them. Think about the subject line, especially if you're emailing busy people, which is all of us. The subject line means so much when emailing, and you can see some examples here. Susan, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes? Susan is the editor of Huffington Post, and I really wanted her advice on something, and she doesn't have a lot of time. So I told her what I need in the subject. And if it's a no, then it's a no. But if it's a yes, then at least she knows what I want without me like telling her about me throughout, she doesn't have time to read long emails. Did you leave before the cupcakes were served? Right? This is an email I sent an investor at this event where there are a lot of entrepreneurs. And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs followed up the next day with this investor because he's like a thing. So I had to think of something cool. So I emailed, did you leave before the cupcakes were served? And there were no cupcakes in the event, but he didn't know that because he left early. And as you can see, he responded, and we had a meeting a couple of days later. Next time over hummus is a reference to the conversation that I had during the event. Jennifer, it's your time to shine. People love compliments. Find a way to compliment someone, especially if they're American. And the reason I emailed Jennifer was because I wanted her to become a jolter. So I said, hey, Jennifer, it's your time to shine. We're doing this and this. Do you want to be a jolter? So be fast, think of the subject line and be specific. If you want something, tell them what you want. If you don't want something and it's just a general follow-up, think of how you're going to do it. Like, hey, it was great meeting you. And then maybe give them like a little piece of value. It could be an article that has to do with something you spoke about, or a video, or kind of an anecdote or a story you thought about, or going back to what we spoke about first, it may be a connection to someone that can be relevant to them at that specific point, because making an intro is a lot of value. And that's it. If I want you guys to remember 2 things is to stand out, to remember, to think of that thing that is going to make you memorable, and to not forget to follow up. Do we have time for questions? Do you have any?
It's honestly up to you. Before we jump into questions, I do want to take a minute to say thank you. Really, the issue of the topic of networking, I know for myself, and I'm allowing myself to speak for our graduates and our students, I feel like that's one of our biggest struggles, is figuring out the right way to approach people and how to make those connections that are going to eventually help promote us in our careers. So I really feel like there was so much added value to the content that you just gave us. So I really want to kind of take a minute to thank you for taking the time to talk to us and tell us all about your journey and about, the strategic points, as hard as it is sometimes to turn a soft skill into something methodological. I really feel like you did an amazing job helping us kind of turn it into strategy. So thank you. And I do want to open the platform up for you guys. If any of you have any questions for Nitzan, this would be the time. don't be shy. This is where we're networking over here. Make yourselves memorable to Nitzan.
It's okay. If you don't do it now, then feel free to email me anytime. Yes.
I have a question. So what are the topics that like you recommend to the conversation to be about? I mean, what is the right balance between like getting too personal and getting memorable and getting professionally to be conceived as a person?
Do you have a specific situation you have in mind?
No, just in general, because as I said, I tend to like to build quite like heavy conversations and so on. But as you said, the best thing is to not to get too personal and too into one person. So how do you make it like shallow enough, but not too shallow?
I want to say an annoying answer, which is practice, but it has to be on the lines. It can't get too personal because it is business. But it also can't be about too much business because, again, especially if it's after hours, that people don't want to talk about how many emails they sent today. I think the way, let me give you an example. If I speak to someone, I actually used to do this a lot, right? You want to make, again, if being memorable is, being interesting. And when people used to ask me, what is Jolt? First thing they met me, because that's on my tag, I didn't want to pitch Jolt. I hate just pitching my startup. First thing that I never met you, I don't know who you are. I pitch Jolt very differently to investors, to potential clients, to potential employees, to potential, to family members. It's very different. It's a different pitch, and anything that I pitch is different depending on the audience. And hopefully same for you guys. So before I pitch, I want to ask a question. So if someone asked me, what is Jolt? I said, it's like Uber, but for ice cream trucks. And I used to go around saying that a lot. And before the person kind of responded, I said, no, I'm just kidding. But how cool is that? And then the conversation went to ice cream trucks, or to the fact that my dream is to kind of, drive around the world in an ice cream truck, which is a true story. And it made the conversation very light. It's not too much about business. And I just tried to postpone the time in which I pitched Jolt. And that did come up in the conversation later, but I didn't want it to be the first thing, because that becomes very salesy. And then the conversation was like, it becomes like it becomes a sales pitch, even if I don't want that. So that's one thing. Another thing, that could be I had this other conversation starter where I didn't just jump on people and ask them that, right? I got, if Amir is speaking to Ariella, and then I know Ariella, so I come into the circle, I'm like, hi, how are you? I have to ask you this thing. When you wake up in the morning, do you use the snooze feature, or do you just wake up the first time the alarm goes off? And then, people think, because it's a question that gets you thinking, and then turns out, and then I explain to people that I'm going around asking this question, and I'm looking at the answers, and I'm collecting the data. And it's really funny because it turns out that the world literally divides into two, half of the, not half, but some people use the snooze always, and some just jump out of bed. And whoever uses snooze always says like, I use snooze. And then they give like an explanation because they feel bad about the fact that they use snooze. And the people who jump out of bed are really proud that they achieve that. Anyhow, it's really, it sounds like nonsense, right? But it's a conversation starter. And whatever happens after that becomes light, but not silly. But when people ask me really heavy questions like, hey, what is Jolt? Or tell me about whatever, really professional, then I try to make it a bit lighter, but I don't speak about my kids right away, or about my eating disorders or whatever, and it depends then, if the conversation does expand, then it's okay. It can get a little deeper, but it has to stay in kind of a comfortable zone for both sides. Hopefully that's helpful.
The whole eating disorders was a joke, right?
Yeah, no. I grew up in Ramat HaSharon. Everyone has eating disorders.
Okay.
It's a thing. I think we'll end here because some people have to drop out, Ariela, if that's okay. But I did share my email. I mean, it's Nitzan@jolt.io. And you can really feel free to follow up with whatever you think I may be able to help with.
Nitzan, thank you so much for your time and all your insights. I love listening to you. I get the privilege of listening to you more often than this. So I'm so happy we got to share it with our graduates and students. So thank you so much. This webinar is going to be recorded, so it's going to be uploaded on different platforms so you all can watch, and you as well, Nitzan. I'm going to send you a link once we have it. So again, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll see you on our next webinar.